So I'm Timothy Snyder from Yale University and the Institute für die Wissenschaften von Menschen here in Vienna, and it's my pleasure to be able to introduce and moderate our last panel entitled A Century of European Disintegration and Integration. If I had a hope for this panel, it was that we would be able to relativize contemporary European experience of integration and disintegration. In general, when people are taking part in a moment of integration, they believe it's going to go on forever, that things will continue to get better, there will be ever closer union, there will be greater progress and prosperity. This is true whether it was the European integration of the late 19th century or the Trente Glorieuses of the late 20th century. And when people are in a moment of disintegration, they tend to think that everything is going to continue to fragment, that the fragments will turn into shards and dust, that we will never hit the bottom, that there will only be more and more blackness, whether that's the 1920s and 1930s, or whether that's perhaps the contemporary moment. So the main thing that I wanted to suggest in organizing this panel and placing it under this particular title is that the last 100 years of European history have seen many moments going both directions. That the First World War itself was a moment of both European integration and disintegration, the integration of the nation state, but the disintegration of empires. That the Nazi project was a project of both disintegration and integration, the disintegration of the nation states that had just been created, but the integration of Europe, especially Eastern Europe, into a new European colonial order. That the European Union itself is a project of both disintegration and integration. It's only possible because of the disintegration of the far-flung European colonial empires, which coincides with and enables the integration of European states inside Europe. And of course, the moment that we face now is one also of simultaneous integration and disintegration. It's just that we've become aware of what's happening around us. The European Union seemed for a time to be the only project in Europe, so much so that its founders and its advocates and the much larger group of people who simply live in the European Union and take its many benefits for granted could think that it was out of history, could think that it was natural, could think that it was very nice, and could not imagine that it would have enemies, which of course it now does. There is now an alternative project of integration in Europe, which is called Eurasia, and its job is to disintegrate the European Union and to integrate Europe, not just Russia or its immediate neighbors, but a territory from Lisbon to Vladivostok according to entirely different premises. So we are also now in a world of integration and disintegration simultaneously. The only thing that I would wish to get across is that this is not so strange, that this is the normal challenge of European life. That was my introduction, which you have to get your introduction in first because the panelists will say things that are entirely different from what you want to say, which makes you look silly if you leave it for the conclusion. So it's now my greater pleasure to introduce the three panelists. The way that we would like to proceed is for each of the panelists to speak for about 10 to 15 minutes on a theme of her or his choice. We will then have a very brief discussion on the panel up here, then move on to the next speaker. All in all, we'll take about 45 minutes to an hour of your time and leave some time for discussion at the end. I'll introduce the three speakers at the beginning, and then we will proceed in alphabetical order. The first, to my immediate right, is Professor Holly Case of Cornell University, one of the leading historians in North America and around the world, I would say, in Southeastern and East Central European history, best known for her book Between States, the Transylvanian Question, and the European Idea during the Second World War. To her immediate right is Professor Jaroslav Hrycák, who directs the Institute of Historical Research at Lviv National University. He's also professor of history at the Ukrainian Catholic University. Among his numerous and indeed countless publications is a major monograph on one of the founders of the Ukrainian nation, the ambiguous and slightly mysterious, although even more prolific, Ivan Franko. The title is Prophet in His Fatherland. To the extreme right is Professor Dariusz Stola, who is a historian, although he is a professor of political science at the Polish Academy of Sciences. He's also a fellow at the Center for Migration Studies. He has two bodies of work. The first has to do with the history of Jewish-Polish relations, and the second has to do with the history of migration. He also has a very important recent responsibility, which he does not mention on the program, and therefore I will not disclose, and I will leave it to him to do so. So with that said, Professor Case, take it away.